Let's talk a little bit more about graphing exponential functions. We have the exponential family of functions. If we have this basic function, f of x equals a to the x. Any function of the form g, where we have a number times a to the x minus h plus k, is a member of the exponential family of functions, of this family of this function, so whatever base a is. The graph moves of g of x would move the f graph to the left if h is less than 0. So if it looks like x plus something, or to the right if x is greater than 0. So when it looks like x minus a number, that's when that's in the exponent. If it moves up, if k is greater than 0, when you're adding the k, or down if it's less than 0, so it looks like subtracting k. It is stretched if b is greater than 1, so it gets taller and skinnier if b is greater than 1, and shrunk if b is between 0 and 1, and that makes it shorter and fatter, appear to be shorter and fatter. And if it's reflected across the x-axis if b is negative. So that makes the family of functions and the changes that can happen. We know this from a previous lesson. This is the basic function we want to graph. So this is in the 2 of the x family, and we know that the graph of f of x equals 2x would contain these 3 points: -1, 1/2, 0, 1, and 1, 2. So we'll work from there. And we will number this graph by ones. So -1, 1/2 would be right here, but we're moving this graph to right with this and 1 up with this plus 1. So from this point we go 2 right and 1 up. We're right here. 0, 1 would be this point. From there go 2 right and 1 up. 1, 2 would be here, 2 right, 1 up would be right here. Now, this plus 1 actually changed our horizontal asymptote. So instead of it being at y equals 0, or the x-axis, now it's at y equals 1. So this is an exponential function that would be growing like that. And the domain is from -infinity to infinity. And the range now this time, instead of starting at 0, starts at 1 to infinity. This graph has a negative, so it's going to reflect down. And this negative x, remember what happens there with that negative x changes this to 1/4 to the x. It flips it over. So that's really the function we're graphing. And this negative will change. Instead of -1, 4, it will be -1, -4. Instead of 0, 1, it will be 0, -1, because of this negative out here. And instead of 1, 1/4, it will be 1, -1/4. So those are the 3 points. -1, again, we are numbering by ones. So -1, -4, -0, -1, and 1, -4. So this exponential function is, because it's reflected across the x-axis, will look like that. Remember, we do draw our graphs almost all the way across. And the domain is still negative infinity to infinity. And the range this time, because it's reflected, we'll start with negative infinity. And the x-axis is my horizontal asymptote, so x-axis is 0. Now, finding limits. It says to use a table or graph to find each limit. I think it's actually easiest to just think about I'm not going to make a table look like such, but I'm just going to do the 3 points I know is on this graph. So we'll have negative 1, 1/3. We'll have 0, 1, and we'll have 1, 3. Now, as x is going to negative infinity, so as it's going this way, what's happening to the y values? It gets smaller. So the limit for 3 to the x, as x goes to negative infinity, that limit is 0. It keeps getting closer and closer to 0. Now this one, remember, the negative x makes this 1/5 to the x. So I'll have negative 1, and the reciprocal will be 5. I'll have still 0, 1, and 1, 1/5. We're going to negative infinity, so x values are getting smaller. And look what's happening. 1/5, 1, 5 is getting bigger. So as that happens, the y value goes to infinity. This case, it's x is greater than. Well, let's think about these points. Negative 1, 3, 0, 1, and 1, 1/3. As x goes to infinity. So as x getting larger this way, what happens to the y values? They're getting smaller. So this is going to go to 0. Here we have a negative x, so this is 1 over e to the x. And we're going to infinity. Well, our values will be negative 1 e for the reciprocal, 0, 1, and 1, 1 to e, as x goes to infinity. So as x getting larger, what happens to my y values? They're getting smaller. So this one also goes to 0.